They say the only things certain are death and taxes. Well, thanks to the Trump administration, one of those is a little less certain. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and this is Bill Whittle Now.
Let me interrupt you.
Please.
Has there been a giant breakthrough in life extension?
Well, oddly enough, it was the other one that I was thinking of, because the Washington Post has a story where they're talking about the impact of the Trump administration's tax reform, specifically related to the estate tax, or what Republicans like to call the death tax. And let me just read you a little excerpt from this Washington Post story. In 2002, about 100,000 Americans filed estate tax returns to the Internal Revenue Service, according to the IRS. In 2018, only 5,000 taxpayers are expected to file these returns, according to IRS data. Last year's GOP tax law, pushed by President Trump, among others, doubles the amount up to $11.2 million that you can pass on to your heirs before you get slammed with that 40% tax. Bill Whittle, does this reform prevent the government from taking a second bite at income that's already been taxed? Or is it just a way, as Washington Post suggests, of keeping the advantages of wealth in the hands of the elite few who didn't earn it?
Wow. Well, let me just start by my first impulse. It doesn't stop the IRS from taking a second bite out of the income. It stops them from taking an 11th bite out. Right? I mean, we talk about income tax, and then there's corporate gains taxes, there's property taxes. I say this frequently, but it bears repeating. If you think you own your home, if you own the title to your home from your bank and you think you own your home, you don't own your home. The United States, your state government owns your home. And the reason they own your home and lease it out to you is because if you don't pay your property taxes, they will come and take away their home from you. So once we understand that, we're getting a little closer to the point here. What they're saying now is that you work a lifetime, and you probably miss most of the childhood of your kids because you're working so hard. And when it comes time finally to understand why you did all of this, because you wanted a better life for your family, it means that now you get to keep a little more of your lifetime's earnings and hand it down to the people who you love, who you did it for in the first place. Otherwise, the government is going to take 40% of it. So I just want people to think about this. I don't see why there's a magic number at 11. There is no magic number. Any of these progressive taxes, Scott, that say that at this point something happens and at this point it doesn't, is evil. Because now what you're saying is, well, if you make more than $11 million, you're evil. If you make less than $1 million, you're good, or at least that's how they like to look at it. But think about this. If I thought that all of the work I was doing, for which I pay almost half of my income goes to taxes, damn near it, in California, and then they tell me that all of this hard work and the saving that I have done, in addition to all of my expenses, in addition to whatever I want to do with my life, in addition to all the taxes I pay from the time I buy the candy bar, I go out to the gas tax, if you want to say that the half that they take there is not enough, and that the stuff that I somehow managed to hold on through discipline and hard work, they're going to take another half of that if I decide to leave it to the people who I worked for in the first place. This is an evil, evil, evil system. And it needs to be called evil, and it needs to be called evil loudly and frequently, because there's nothing morally good about this at all.
Well, Bill,
Nothing.
I think you don't understand this, because you're not on the right side of this argument. You're not part of that group, because we're talking about, as a couple, like if you and your wife passed on wealth, you could pass on over $22 million to your children. It's a very, very tiny percentage. And so the problem with that, Bill, is two things. Number one is a very few people have all the money. And number two is that if they have, 95% of the pie, that means there's less pie for you and for me, right?
Aha. Well, once again, you've fallen expertly as you do with your ability to master the devil's advocate questions, because you're an actual journalist. It's not your damn pie, okay? It's our pie. We worked for it. We spent our lives baking it. It's our pie. Once you get this idea that it's your pie, that I worked my entire life for you, some bureaucrat someplace who's going to take a $250,000 a year annual retirement starting at age 50 something in California, if you think I'm doing all this for you, you're out of your mind. And if you think I'm going to keep doing it for you, you're also out of your mind. It's not your damn pie. Okay, it's my pie. Now, I'm willing to put some of my pie into things like roads and airports and Navy and things like that. And if my money was going to those things in any kind of a reasonable fashion, my tax burden wouldn't be 50%, it'd probably be 11% if the people spent the money on what it was supposed to be spent on. But that's not what happens. They are taking wealth away from me, which I work very hard for. They're keeping most of it, and they're sending enough of it to inner cities and other poor places to buy the votes necessary for them to stay on top of this extortion scheme. And that's what it is. It's just extortion. They have the power to take away the house that you paid for at any time you stop paying them the rent that you will have to pay for the rest of your life, and that your children are going to have to pay and your grandchildren are going to have to pay. By the time the sun goes out, Scott, your $250,000 house, you will have paid probably, I don't know, $100 million for it in terms of property taxes by the time that house is demolished in 100 years. No, it's not your damn pie. It doesn't belong to you. You didn't earn it. You didn't do anything. You've already taken my income tax. You've already taken a sales tax. You've already taken a gas tax and all the rest of them. And now you're telling me that this meager amount of money that I'm able to save after all of this predation, somehow I'm not allowed to give to the people I love without you taking another half of it? Who the hell do you think you are? Who do you think you are? What on earth possibly could you think that you provide in order to take that amount of work away from people? Because money is liquid work. It's compensation for your lifetime that you've spent doing whatever you're doing. And when the government comes and says, yeah, we're going to take half of your stuff before you die, and then after you die, if you made enough stuff, we're going to take another half of that stuff so that you can't pass anything on to your kids because it really belongs to us. There is no end. It's not going to end. You're never going to get to the point where the federal government says, we have enough money now. We're never going to get to the point where we say, these programs are adequately funded. We're certainly never going to get to the point where we say, well, NASA was who I grew up worshiping, I might add. You're never going to get to the point where NASA says, well, we needed $13 billion a year, but we were flying 4 space shuttles a year to the International Space Station. Now we're not flying anybody. We'd like another $14 billion, please. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. EPA is never going to go away. None of it. It's cancer. It's a tumor. It keeps growing. It never dies. It's immortal. And it metastasizes just like tumors do into every single part of our lives. And because we're such decent people, as a general rule, we decide, well, if it's the law, it's the law. There's not much I can do about it. It is a law written by extortionists in order to have the gun to your head of the legal ability to enforce their will, to take most of what you make with your life, and in exchange provide you with what? The 28 best schools in the world?
Now, there's an angle here, Bill, that you probably haven't considered, and I'm going to appeal to you on the basis of the fact that you're a capitalist, so-called, and one might even call you a compassionate conservative. And let me just read you a couple quotes.
Let me just stop you right there.
Again, from this Washington.
No. I'm just going to stop you right there. First of all, capitalism is a word that was invented by Karl Marx to describe a system that he despised. Capitalism brings to mind intentionally the guy on the monopoly money, an enormous fat guy with a top hat holding 2 sacks that have a big dollar sign on it, right? That you can't play in this game unless you have capital.
And that's why I said so-called. Because
well, I'm correcting your so-called. So there's the whole thing about you're a capitalist. I am a free market advocate. I believe people should be able to buy and sell what they want and do what they want with their own money. As far as the compassionate conservatism goes, I'm not going to accept that label either. It's inherently compassionate, and to call it compassionate conservatism is to assume that there's some form of it that isn't compassionate. I'm not going to buy that argument either. Now you may continue.
Thank you. And the point was that you care about the dignity of work, and you think that work is an ennobling thing, and it's always good to see when jobs are up. Here's a continued quote from the Washington Post story, and actually I'm paraphrasing here, and then I'll quote. A law professor says that enrollment in her estate tax law classes has plummeted because, quote, basically, people are no longer paying $1,000 an hour for advice about this stuff. They don't need it, meaning advice about estate taxes. A U.S.C. tax law professor says, quote, the tax policy of the Trump administration has made it easier to avoid taxes without professional advice. As former Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn once remarked, Only morons pay the estate tax, and now the morons don't even need tax lawyers. Bill, some lawyers are getting out of the dwindling estate tax business because of the Trump tax reform, and fewer are entering into it. Doesn't that mean reducing the estate tax is actually hurting American jobs?
It's actually hurting the jobs of American tax lawyers. And my fondest wish in the world is that the 2020 election will turn on the issue of putting tax attorneys out of work. That's my fondest wish. My hope is that the Progressive Party lives up to its standards, lives up to its morality, lives up to its ethics, lives up to every principle that it holds dear, and make a stand on a hill in order to protect the careers of tax attorneys who apparently are no longer needed by the American people, who are beginning to figure out that maybe they don't need all of this advice on how to be drained of all of their blood. Okay? Now, I'm not saying every tax attorney is a bad guy. In fact, I bet you most of them are pretty good people who are working for you in order to minimize the amount of blood that these leeches take out of you every single year. But if you're trying to play the world's biggest violin about how tax attorneys are going out of work because people are not paying their inheritance tax on the money they've already been taxed 15 times on before they put it into the bank, then I pray to God in heaven, if he will listen to me, please, please, please put into the ears of Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren the dire, dire, dire situation of tax attorneys in the United States, and make it your campaign issue for 2020. Please, 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 please.
Well, Bill Whittle now survives on the voluntary cooperation and contribution of the members at BillWhittle.com, who
of what's left of what's left of your money after they're finished taking it from you by force. So thank you.
And of your own free will, you're contributing that $9.95 a month. We thank you for that, and we sincerely pray to the God of heaven also that he will move upon many others to do so, because we think this message is important. We know our members do, and we are grateful for the opportunity to spread this across the country and around the world. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.